Good evening. Welcome, everyone, to what is, for me, a particularly joyous occasion, the presentation of this marvelous anthology, The Shared Language of Poetry, Mexico and the United States, co-edited by myself and Eyda Merediz. We're fortunate this evening to have present with us several of the contributors to this volume. This is the collective effort of 25 authors who presented essays, translations, poetry, many of whom participated directly in the symposium that took place several years ago and that this volume is intended to commemorate. The edition is by Literal Publishing. I'm going to be wearing a couple of hats here because I participated in the edition and in the symposium that took place several years ago. I'm also managing editor of Literal Magazine, and so we're very pleased on the part of the publishing house to have been able to participate in the creation of this magnificent volume, which is indeed a celebration of the bridges that we build between countries through poetry. Literal is also celebrating, speaking of joyous occasions, its 20th anniversary this year as a presence in the publishing world, in the world of magazines, webzines, digital literature that is trying to help cure this diálogo de sordos, or this lack of communication that we can sometimes have between Mexico and the United States. And so I'm kind of proud that all of this is coming together this evening for this wonderful occasion. And to start with, I would like to first invite Gwen Kirkpatrick to share with us a little bit about how this came into being. She was one of the co-organizers from Georgetown University of the original symposium. Gwen Kirkpatrick is Professor Emerita of Latin American Literature at the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, Georgetown University, after spending over 20 years at the University of California in Berkeley. And two of her decisive contributions to Latin American critical bibliography are Women, Culture, and Politics in Latin America from 1990 and The Dissonant Legacy of Modernism, Lugones, Herrera, and Reisig, and the Voices of Modern Latin American Poetry from 1989. Welcome, Gwen, and please kick things off.
Okay, thank you. First, I'd just like to say I'm delighted to be associated with the project. I think the project really came more from Eyda and Tanya, and it was in part because of the presence of Jose Emilio Pacheco and interest in all things Mexican and the bridges across the commonalities. Eyda has asked me to read the first three paragraphs. Is this the moment, Eyda?
Sure.
Now is the
time. Add a little bit that this
of the introduction, which I enjoyed doing with Eyda. Okay. Poetry is the oldest and most universal form of human verbal artistry across languages, regions, cultures, and time. It evidences language at work. It is grounded by its own materiality, while at the same time it transcends the literal or obvious. Poetry recalls our coming into language as we play through sound to name and rename, to recognize the familiar or render it strange. Its craft reveals the unexpected or unknown. To work in poetry is to navigate manifold messagings, unanticipated relationships between joy and sorrow, play and lamentation, the everyday and the sacred, high and low, the oral and the written. Often poetry is erroneously considered the exclusive expression of high culture, cryptic, unattainable to an untrained eye or sensibility, a decadent pleasure. Yet poetry is ever present in all our lives. From early childhood on, it is constitutive and life-sustaining. Constantly evolving and interacting, poetry is an integral part of every nation's mainstream culture, as well as a force in any counterculture space. Poetry lives in carefully published books, but also in independent digital ventures on the page, but also on the bathroom wall, in the classroom and library, but also on the street. Its words shape the fine instrument of poet laureates and articulate the voices of popular music. Poetry digs deep to where it questions reason, to the place where affect lingers and desire awaits. Poetry is indeed a path of shared experiences that allows us to remain in contact with the past, to dialogue with our own present, and imagine possible futures. Poetry materializes our common humanity. In the spirit of the common language of poetry, this collective project was born of the desire to renew, rekindle, and strengthen the literary and cultural connectedness between Mexico and the US, opening up a conversation within the Americas and its indigenous traditions. What we envisioned first as an academic event is now a book that makes a passionate case for the essential value of poetry and the humanities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for expressing so wonderfully the intention of the symposium and of this volume, Dr. Kirkpatrick. Next, I would like to open the microphone for Eyda M. Merediz, the co-organizer and co-editor of this volume. She is an associate professor of Latin American literature and cultures at the University of Maryland. She holds a PhD from Princeton University, and her academic interests concentrate primarily on the fields of colonial Latin America and early modern transatlantic studies, in particular historiography and epic and dramatic poetry. She's the author of the monograph Refracted Images, The Canary Islands Through a New World Lens from 2004, among other volumes. Welcome, Eyda.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. And I would like to basically say that thank you, Gwen, for being there from the very beginning. And thank you, Tanya, for being such a wonder, not only in the organization of the Mexican side of things, but actually as a translator and interpreter throughout 3 days of really intense work. And right now, I'd like to also thank Rosemary Salom for this wonderful volume. And I would have to give credit to the National Endowment of the Humanities. And what we got was a chairman's grant for public programming that was born out of me basically walking around the halls of the Mexican Cultural Institute and finding an appointee that basically pointed out in the right direction of what we should do. It was at a moment in which I think both Mexico and the US needed to strengthen their relationship, needed to build bridges and not walls. And I think we're entering another period in which poetry is very much needed again. And we hope that this volume has a second life again after the symposium. Our introduction didn't want to really be a comprehensive literary historical view of poetry, or the history of poetry, or anything of that sort, but it was very selective in certain ideas that basically pointed out to cross-fertilization. We also recovered some key figures that were mentioned in essays of poetic expression. And above all, we wanted to bring up intellectual giants like Jose Emilio Pacheco that had a very close tie to our university and our area. We also wanted to address both the cosmopolitan side of poetry and at the same time the very, essence of the experience of racialized people and, women writing and so on. And we also wanted to address what is the value of poetry for today and continuously, really. We follow closely the structure of the conference by reporting on 2 roundtables and the 4 panels that we had the pleasure to witness and listen over 3 days when the pandemic gave us a break. And those who came exuded a never-seen humanly joy. I do not think that we can replicate what we saw and heard that day, but this book is really trying very hard to do so. And we certainly have, made it come life if we wanted. The result is basically a hybrid book, almost one of a kind, in which we mix essays and poetic praxis. And by essays, we mean fluid, accessible, and insightful. The selection of poetry covers everything, wide range of styles and topics that allow for the metaphysical, the metaphorical, and the down-to-earth to interact, showing in the process a dialogue and a break with poetic traditions. The main topics of the roundtable discussion dealt with the transformation of poetry in a new technological age, whether there are new democratic forces that act on it or not. And we have certainly seen the proliferation of ChatGPT in the last 3 years. And we can discuss about, whether that reality has changed in any way, or we can see. We also discussed the value of poetry as a figurehead for the humanities. I don't have to tell you that optimism and potential were met with caution and criticism. The discussions left us all enlightened and energized, and I hope you can see that in the volume. The 4 clusters of ideas that the panels basically discuss address the poetic breath in the 21st century, the art of translation in the global world, the body poetics, and also indigenous linguistic and geographic remappings. I have to say that our conclusion was that poetry will survive, as Gloria Gaynor will have it.
And in that spirit, I'd like to recall that the intention, of course, to presenting a book is that the book circulate, that people purchase the volume, that they read and enjoy it. In the group chat, I'm providing a link to the literal publishing page where the volume is available to be ordered. And so hopefully people will take advantage of that marvelous opportunity. Thank you, Eyda, for your words of wisdom and encouragement in what I think for many of us has been a rather difficult few days. And also we are very fortunate tonight to have 2 of the literary superstars who were featured during the symposium and who appear in this volume with us. And so I'd like now to invite both of them to speak a little bit about the essays that they contributed to this volume. And once we've finished discussing that, we will proceed to have a final round of reading of poetry. We also are very fortunate to have here with us tonight several of the very talented poets and translators whose work is present in this volume. And so I would like to start with you. Inés Hernández Ávila is with us, and she is Nimpu Nez Perce and Tejana. She's a professor of Native American Studies at the University of California, Davis, and one of the 6 founders of the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association. Her research focuses on the interrelationships between autonomy, creativity, spirit, and social justice through the study of Native American indigenous poetry, as well as the US and Mexico, with a particular focus on Chiapas. She is a poet, translator, visual artist, and a member of the Luk Upsime, the North Star Collective, a group of Nimipu creative writers and language workers. Welcome, Inés.
Gracias. Kachiyao, thank you. I'm honored to be here. I was honored to be part of this project. I still have fond memories of the time that we were all together. I was delighted to meet new people. I'll be brief. I'm looking at my clock. So I think really for my essay in the volume, I felt an obligation to provide a background to Native people in the United States. I felt a need to go on record as saying who we are and what we've had to deal with as our challenges that came as a result of the imperial and colonial projects that dispossessed us and decimated us to the point where we are 2% of the population of a country that where we used to be 100%. I'm fascinated with, I've always loved poetry. I always loved to read. Poetry, I think, took me by the hand a long time ago, even though I've had to dedicate my career really to building the field of Native American Indigenous Studies. And so I'm now Professor Emerita, retired as of June 2023. So in my I don't want to go over everything that was in the essay, but I do want to point out that right now in the United States, there are three very important movements going on that my essay speaks to in a way, although I don't say it exactly this way. But there's a land back movement, a languages back movement, and a knowledges back movement on behalf of Indigenous people. So we are saying, this is our land. Every place you step on this earth here in the United States is our land, and we want it back. And I know that seems unimaginable, but there have been instances where gaming tribes, for example, have been able to buy land back. There have been instances where white landowners have actually given their land back to the tribes to whom the land belongs. So it's not so far-fetched. It's not completely out of the question, I think, to think about how that process might evolve over the years. And obviously it's not something that's going to happen overnight. Related to the Land Back Project is the Languages Back Project, because the languages often are said, and it's hard to speak in absolutes about Indigenous people anytime, but often Indigenous people say that their languages emerge from the land. And if you peruse our 1,304-page Nez Perce dictionary, you'll see that there are actual references to places on the land where the land has storied narratives and evidence of for example, our creation story at Kamiai in Idaho, where you can see the footprints and the remnants of the heart of the monster that are part of our creation story. So the Languages Back movement is related to the Land Back movement, and the Knowledges Back movement is related to both, because the knowledges are embedded in the languages. And one example that I did use in my essay is the notion of tamalwit, which means our governments, our laws, and those have to do with what in our culture it means to be Titokanawit, a true human being. And what I love about this is that I've found that concept exists amongst other Indigenous peoples. For example, in Mexico, there's often a reference to Indigenous peoples as los hombres verdaderos. Of course, I translate that into los seres verdaderos. But the idea of un ser verdadero, and what is that? And again, I don't want to speak in absolutes, but there are many Indigenous belief systems that say that we must lead by the heart. And I think, in a way, for me, there's a connection to leading with the heart and poetry, right? And in the ancient Nahuatl tradition, we have that concept of in Xochitl, which was supposedly the way that in the higher institutions of higher learning, that the Mantenin wise teachers taught each student that the path to truth was through poetry. And I love that. I love that over 500 years ago, we had an Indigenous belief system that understood not only that the path to truth is through poetry and arts, but that perspective honored the uniqueness and therefore the autonomy of each student. And I think that's an incredible example for us in present time. I mean, I know I'm probably out of my 5 minutes, so I think I better stop talking.
Thank you so much, Inés. Just for now, because we look forward to hearing your reading of one of the poems present in the volume of your authorship. And thank you for those words of inspiration with regards to original peoples, which was one of the topics that was central to the symposium that took place. Now it seems like rather long ago, although I think it's only been several years, right? I'm trying to remember when this first happened.
21.
21, several years ago. So thank you very much. And we also have another scholar poet present here, Pura Lopez Colomé. I would like her also to speak about the essay that she wrote that's present, or perhaps read a small fragment of her contribution to this volume. Pura Lopez Colomé is a poet, translator, and essayist who has an MA degree in Spanish and Latin American literature from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. She is the author of 11 books of poetry. I think it's probably more by now, but Poemas Reunidos. Corona Culta was published in 2013, and more recent volumes are Via Corporis and Borrosa y Mago Mundi, both published by the Fondo de Cultura Económica, which appeared in 2016 and 2021, respectively. Like Ines and like many of the other authors present in this book, she has received many awards, most recently the Alfonso Reyes. And so welcome, Pura, and we're glad to hear your thoughts about your presence here in the shared language of poetry.
Oh, thank you, Tanya. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone. And well, I miss those moments in Washington, D.C. Some years ago, Tanya, I must say. It was a fantastic symposium. It was full of great things that were said, and the atmosphere was at the same time formal and informal. It was full of poetry, really, you know. I'd like to just read the first part of the essay I wrote for the book, which is a fantastic book, Tanya. Really, Tanya and Eyda, this is a wonderful work to get us all together. Yes, it is. It is beautiful. There isn't one errata in it. It is fantastic. In Mexico, that doesn't happen. I mean, it's a book of errata with some words in Mexico in general. Okay, so this is Poetry as Safeguard. Poetry is the only human activity whose deep, powerful presence, clear as water, nevertheless seems to elude any definition. It seeps irretrievably through our fingers. If this was so for Emily Dickinson, for the rest of us, is even worse. Impossible to capture it, to make it fit the purposes of any dictionary or encyclopedia. Dickinson knows poetry is beyond her, transcending logic or explanation. And Akhmatova, on the other hand, recognizes without a doubt the appearance of the muse, her commands, her inspiration. She's able to talk to her, to absorb her breath. In that brief exchange, she lets us confront her, just as she does, disbelieving she dictated to Dante the verses of Inferno, but refuses to define her. The great Marianne Moore also looks her in the eye and entitles her memorable poem Poetry, but does not try too hard to pin the butterfly to the page. She claims, I too dislike it. How can you define the undefinable? Maybe its essence lies in its undefinability. And what about translation? Unattainable as it also seems, as a separate creation, it embodies its multifaceted mirror. It wouldn't be far-fetched then to enter the undefinable through concrete instances, always keeping Borges in mind, who said, St. Augustine said, what is time? If they do not ask me, I know what it is. If they ask me what it is, I do not know. This is exactly my response about poetry. This is included in his essay, El Enigma de la Poesía. As Borges himself has repeated, the emotion it causes suffices. The mere touch that provokes a shiver as a first step to enter its content. Emily Dickinson approaches the yes-no concerning it in a very different way. She's always original, not interested in warmth as a defining element of poetry, nor does she speak of a construct of the mind. In what she says, there's always something intensely visceral. She tells her mentor, if I read a book and it makes my whole body so cold, no fire can ever warm me, I know that is poetry. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry. These are the only ways I know it. Is there any other way? I mean, going further than Emily Dickinson is quite hard, but I'm just going to read one more paragraph written by Alistair Reid, who to me was not only a friend, a very dear friend, he was a mentor, and he never spoke with pride, real pride about his translations of Neruda or Borges, which were fantastic, really. He was always like having a normal, ordinary conversation with whoever was reading what he wrote. I mean, I had the fortune to work with him in this fantastic anthology that we recorded. It was a recorded anthology with Fondo de Cultura some years ago. It's 3 CDs and poetry in English and in Spanish. Alistair read the English, I read the Spanish, and it was just marvelous. Probably one of the moments when I've most learned about the craft of translation. Alistair says about he sort of made up this word for me, which is translatability, which is the first thing to try to look for in a poem that one wants to translate. And but he says he centers his attitudes in the verb to match. He says, on the one hand, certain poems seem to lend themselves to translation, almost invite it, and fit easily into the other language, whereas others, perhaps through density or compression, stubbornly resist any easy recreation. We had in mind the poet Campion's definition of a poem as a system of linked sounds, and we paid particular attention to the sound patterns of the poems we worked on. For although the pattern cannot be reproduced, it can be matched. And this verb is essential here, I think. Every poem has a particular voice tone, which the translator must catch, for it is through their sound that words of a poem are transformed into pure feeling. Alistair says it just like that, you know, as if it were the easiest task in the world. And it is a very, very difficult task, but it's love's labors, you know, it's just something that either you do because you're passionate about, or you just, you better, you know, abandon the work. So, well, I hope that you can sort of get the feel of what the translator did in the case of the poem that I'm going to read at the end. And I hope the translator herself is here so that you can get the feel of that sound.
That will be coming up soon. Thank you so much for those words. And just as we had roundtable discussions and presentations dedicated to subject matter related to original peoples with Inés Hernández Ávila, as well as Natalia Toledo, and Pura was present on the roundtable discussions regarding translation in poetry, as was Forrest Gander. Just to let you know, those of you who are watching, that there are many other voices present in this anthology regarding these topics that I think are very urgent in terms of poetry today in the 21st century, focusing, of course, on the shared language between poets from Mexico and the United States. And so I think we can dive right into the best part of the evening, as far as I'm concerned, which is, of course, the poetry. I'd like to begin with a reading of a poem by Balam Rodrigo, who unfortunately isn't present in this session, but we do have with us here his translator, Chela Samuelson, and so we would like to honor her contribution to this volume. Just to give you an idea who Balam is, if you're not familiar with his work, he was born in Chiapas. In his bio, he likes to describe himself as a former soccer player, as a master's in biology from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, and certified in pastoral theology. But of course, most of us know that he is the author of over 40 books of poetry, has been translated extensively. And the poem that Chela has chosen to read tonight comes from the Libro Centroamericano de los Muertos, which I believe is one of the most significant contributions to contemporary poetry. Chela Samuelson is an associate professor of Spanish at San Jose State University. She holds a PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and she writes on narrative and poetry of contemporary Mexico. And so without further ado, I'll be reading the Spanish version of Balam Rodrigo's poem, the original version. It's entitled 14 grados 40 segundos 35.5 N 92 grados 08 segundos 50.4 W Río Suchiate. Este es el origen de la reciente historia de un lugar llamado México. Aquí migraremos, estableceremos la muerte antigua y la muerte nueva, el origen del horror, el origen del holocausto, el origen de todo lo acontecido a los pueblos de Centroamérica, naciones de la gente que migra. Vine a este lugar porque me dijeron que acá murió mi padre en su camino hacia Estados Unidos, sin llegar a ver los dólares ni los granos de arena en el desierto. Bajé de los Cuchumantanes, desde los bosques de azules, hojas de la nación quiché, desde la casa en donde habitan la niebla y los quetzales, hasta llegar cerca de Ayutla, a la orilla del río Suchiate. Abandoné el olor a cuerpos quemados de mi aldea, la peste militar, con sus ladridos de tierra arrasada, mordiendo hueso y calcañar con metrallas y napalm, su huracán de violaciones y navajas que aniquilaban a los hombres de maíz, con perros amaestrados por un gobierno que alumbra el camino de sus genocidas con antorchas de sangre y leyes de mierda. Huí del penetrante olor a odio y podredumbre. Caminé descalzo hasta el otro lado del inframundo para curarme los huesos y el hambre. Nunca llegué. 2 machetazos me dieron en el pecho para quitarme la plata y las mazorcas del morral. El primero derramó mis últimas palabras en quiché. El otro me dejó completamente seco, porque a mi corazón lo habían quemado los caibiles junto a los cuerpos de mi familia. Dicen algunos que en la ribera de este río se aparece un fantasma, pero yo sé que soy, que he sido y seré el unigénito de los muertos, guardián de mi propia sombra, negro relámpago de mi pueblo, bulto ahogado en esta poza en donde inicia Gilbalba. 2 fichas de cerveza gallo pusieron en mis ojos. Todos los días veo cruzar por estas aguas a los barqueros de la muerte. a los comerciantes del dolor que llevan en sus canoas de tablas y cámaras de llanta las almas de los migrantes enfiladas puntualmente hacia el Tzompantli llamado México. Dicen polleros y coyotes que ven mi fantasma en la ribera. Por eso se santiguan y rezan al cruzar las aguas rotas de este espejo seco en el que escriben su nombre con el filo estéril de las hachas votivas. Todos los días veo pasar a las hileras de muertos, a los que migran sin llegar a los Estados Unidos, parvadas de cuerpos en pena, tristes figuras humanas, barro entre los insomnes dedos de Dios. Yo, primogénito de los migrantes muertos, los recibo con un racimo de filosos machetes en lugar de brazos, iluminado por la cara oculta de esta luna leprosa. Bienvenidos al cementerio más grande de Centroamérica, fosa común donde se pudre el cadáver del mundo. Bienvenidos al abierto culo del infierno.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here to share this translation, which I should point out that this marks kind of the beginning of my foray into translation. And since then, I've had a lot more experience, and I'm working with a co-translator, Ilana Luna, who's so wonderful, working on Cristina Rivera Garza's poetry. So I appreciate your ears today with this poem by Balam, who joined us at San Jose State to work with students and do a public event with the students' translations, which I think were better than mine. So, 14 degrees, 40 minutes, 35.5 seconds north, 92 degrees, 8 minutes, 50.4 seconds west, Suchiate River. This is the origin of the recent history of a place called Mexico. We will migrate here. Here we will establish the old death and the new death. The origin of horror, the origin of the Holocaust, origin of everything that's happened to the people of Central America, nations of people who migrate. I came to this place because they told me that my father died here on the road to the United States without ever seeing the dollars or the grains of sand in the desert. I came down from the Cuchamantanes, from the forest of blue leaves belonging to the Quiche Nation, from the house where the cloud dwells with the Quetzals, until I came to the banks of the river Suchiate, close to Ayutla. I abandoned the smell of burned bodies in my town, the military pestilence, their growls of raised earth, gnawing bones and crushing with machine guns and napalm, their hurricane of rape and knives that annihilate the people of the corn with trained dogs. On behalf of a government that lights the path of genocide with bloody torches and shitty laws. I fled from the penetrating smell of hate and rot. I walked barefoot to the other side of the underworld to cure my bones and my hunger. I never arrived. 2 blows of the machete hit me in the chest to take my money and my backpack of corn. The first blow spilled my last words in Quiche. The last left me totally dry because the caibiles had already burned my heart together with the bodies of my family. Some say that on the banks of this river, a ghost appears, but I know that I am, have been, and will always be the only child of the dead, guardian of my own shadow, the black lightning bolt of my people, a drowned lump in this pool where the Shilbalba begins. They put 2 gallo beer caps on my eyes. Every day I see death's boatmen crossing these waters. The salesmen of pain that carry their plank canoes and their inner tubes, the souls of the migrants obediently lined up and facing toward the Zompantli called Mexico. The polleros and the coyotes say they see my ghost on the river bank, so they cross themselves and pray crossing the broken waters of this dry mirror where they write their names in the sterile blade of votive axes. Every day I see passing the lines of the dead, those that migrate without arriving to the United States, flocks of bodies in pain, sad human figures, clay between the sleepless fingers of God. I, the firstborn of the dead migrants, receive them with a bunch of sharp machetes instead of arms, lit up by the secret face of this leprous moon. Welcome to the largest cemetery in Central America, common grave in which rots the corpse of the world. Welcome to the open asshole of hell. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chela, for that very moving reading and version of Balam Rodrigo's poem. I think now let's move over to a different tone, a more playful piece of poetry, something that I enjoyed dearly when Inés read it for us at the symposium a few years ago. And in this case, for the Spanish version, given that Inés, while bilingual, wrote the poem in English, well, more than bilingual, I'm sorry, a speaker of several languages. And Manuel is going to be providing us with the version in Spanish, and then we will listen to Inés read her original poem. Manuel Cuellar, who also was present in the symposium as a moderator, a participant, a very welcome presence, is assistant professor of Latin American literature and cultures in George Washington University. His work focuses on Mexican literary and cultural studies with an emphasis on race, gender, and sexuality. He holds a PhD in Hispanic languages and literatures from the University of California, Berkeley, and he's the author of a very fascinating book, Choreographing Mexico, choreography, right? Choreographing, I believe is the correct pronunciation there, Mexico, festive performances and dancing histories of a nation, published in UT Press in 2022. Welcome, Manuel, and we'd love to hear your version of Inés's poem.
It's like correction, Tanya. He's now associate professor.
I see. Congratulations, associate professor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. What an honor to be here with you today. And like Shayla, was, my first time translating poetry, and it was very humbling. And so I want to thank Inés for trusting me with this labor. Here it goes. Oh, tengo una gota de francesa, supongo, pero no lo suficiente para hablar de eso. Es lo rojizo de mi pelo al sol que late, cobre en mi vida de un intruso de hace mucho tiempo. Era un buen francés, cazador, comerciante. Encontró belleza en el canto de risa montañosa de mi bisabuela Niñipú, asombro en su cabello de noche negra cayéndose, amor en sus oh tan tiernos ojos comprensivos, cargados de socorro, que conocían los límites y los ritmos de todas las cosas. Le llenó de un orgullo incomparable el saber que una mujer como esa lo recibiría, sería su compañera y esposa para siempre. Tomó a sus recién nacidos en sus brazos y los bendijo en su idioma, como ella los bendijo en el suyo. Los protegió y amó ferozmente y dio su vida para cuidar de ellos. Tomó ferozmente la vida de mi antigua K, que desgarró para sí mismo y la dejó vidriosa y muda para ser encontrada por su familia después, para dar a luz después a un hijo, a una hija, quien desde el vientre, el centro del universo, alcances de los cielos, recordó la violencia del grito de indignación que ninguna semilla se amortiguaría jamás. Gracias.
I do want to preface this reading by saying that what inspired the poem is that my uncle, decades ago, my mother's brother, told me, in a way laughingly, but he said, you know, we have one drop of French, one drop of Flathead, and one drop of Iroquois. He said, but we're 99.99% Nez Perce, right? And so I thought about that, and I did think about, my hair was always, it wasn't black, it was very dark brown, but in the sunlight you could see like shades of red. So that's how this poem came to be. Oh, I have a drop of French, I guess, but not enough to talk about. Is it the redness of my hair in the sun that beats copper into my life from an interloper long ago? Was he a good Frenchman, trapper, trader? Did he find beauty in the singing mountain laughter of my old-time Nimipu grandma? Wonder in her dark night falling hair, love in her oh so tender, comprehending, succor-laden eyes that knew the limits and the rhythm of all things. Did he feel with pride incomparable to know such a woman would receive him, be his companion and forever wife? Did he take their newborn children in his arms and bless them in his language as she blessed them in hers? Did he protect and love them fiercely and give his life to care for them? Or did he fiercely take the life of my old-time Kotsa? Did he rip her open for himself and leave her glazed and mute to be found by family later, to give birth later to a son, to a daughter who from the womb, center of the universe, reaches of the heavens, recalled the violence of the scream of outrage that no seed would ever muffle. Okay. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And now, since we have also present with us Pura and her translator, Marta Batis. Marta, unfortunately, lost her voice. She's here with us. She's present, but she has asked me to read her version of Pura's poem for her. And I think in this case, why don't we start with the English so that we can hear Pura's original version afterwards, just to round out this lovely session of ideas and verse. The poem is entitled Eclipse, and it is dedicated to Scott Griffin. Noun, the total or partial masking of the light from one celestial body by the passage of another between it and the observer, or the former's passing through the shadow of a celestial body situated between itself and the star that illuminates it, when they are completely or partially aligned on the same plane. In a ferocious competition with God knows what other erudite colloquium of caps and gowns, thus speaks the mighty Colegio de Mexico. The worst part is that one understands the clumsy explanation offered by the dictionary and is eclipsed by relative clauses strung together like sausages. Does the masking, the obscuring of one thing by another, mean its negation, reduction, devaluation? Twists within turns. 1. On board the Sea Wolf travels a compact crew, assembled and bewitched by the mere prospect of circling the globe and returning home alive, feeling more audacious than Aeneas or Magellan. Before setting sail, during and at the end of the journey, virginal before, during and after giving birth, the captain, a foreign European newcomer, albeit now transformed into an American, with traces of a mythological griffin beneath his kepi. Instead of lifting prayers to the faraway, the intangible, the contrived, a power recognizable within the pillars of some crumbled tradition, raises his voice to the four winds to recite, almost crying out, follower, by contrast, actually divine, which I would have entitled partaker because of its limitless endeavor, a guttural, beautiful widget of letters electrifying eardrums. Few understand the double meaning because the passage of time and life's turmoil have cloaked him in the guise of an accomplice, that too. Every attribute shimmers like the stars that night. Who follows whom? Who was whose partaker? He, still so young, blindly following his father in the field, subsumed in the figure of an omnipotent giant who embodied the life to come? Or switching places, was he, not callow in the least, opening furrows while the old man dragged himself with the life that has been, shadowless, stooped yet cramped by the demeanor of the proud? Were both of them one and the same guide dog, the child circulating in the man's blood and arteries, glancing in awe at the vault from within, the glare of the anima, a devout follower of the cult to the stars? 2. Everyone caulking, everyone singing, not always happy, very scared at times by assorted likelihoods, prey to a colossal uncertainty looming into view like a promised land, dry skin, salt water corroding the harmony, making an effort for the sake of others and assuming a front like never before. We're doing fine, in full sail, etc. It's your turn to do the laundry. So-and-so will cook tomorrow. Soup, fish, fish, soup. The day after tomorrow, someone else will mop, clean the sink, and so on. And above all, the nighttime watch will be shared fairly in turn. No room for distractions, melancholies, laments. No, nothing of the sort. And pay attention to the repairs of the entrails of the vessel, which is far from perfect, like ourselves. Minor and major surgeries without causing distress. Sailors, id est, machines or vice versa, suffice to weave together cables, in the end, the nerves of steel, image and likeness of the celestial choreography. 3. Is there in this language of Cervantes and Berceo no clear onomatopoeia capable of, in a single blow, erupting into a name for the push and pull, the swelling and deflating of the sails? What a pity. A word like thwack, an oscillating verb and noun that gets easily along with a trimmed canvas. Let's talk coarsely or sweetly about things. Let's challenge or thank them until we arrive, to kill time, while wind and air shelter us in their womb, destroy us, or lead us to port. Neither good nor bad, just any port. We've already shared a bit of everything, what matters and what doesn't, what we want, carefully omitting the slightest mention of the future that awaits who knows where and conjures that which we really see when we think we are seeing things. The mention of this caravel, for instance, which creaks and parts the waters that is assumed to be afloat. We have even penetrated the precarious and marshy territory of the soul, our souls, in search of answers of love or vicarious forgiveness. Vicarious? Forgiveness? Love? Answers? In search of? And here, amid the waves, the multi-headed monster comes, sublime onomatopoeia, in murderous verbalization. 4. After the storm comes the gnashing of teeth, the panic of having misinterpreted maps, the discovery of the broken compass, a crack, mortal wound, deceptive calm, and all of a sudden an unexpected space, not a lull, but the supreme, the firmament curdled with stars, an apparition that coincides with the fluorescence on the curvaceous back of the cetacean, a whale, breeding sparks and 4 eyes on deck, 2 astounded people, illuminated, mesmerized, partakers, eclipsed. 5. The sea wolf, birthed in Patagonia for the last time and in one piece. Its passengers, its spawn, among emerging from the dark room without having discovered anything worthy of Copernicus, shading their eyes from the unbearable glare of the king of stars, which in turn did lay bare what Calderón de la Barca, another Charon, referred to as the great theater of the world. And faced by such epiphanies, one can only trust in having prepared oneself since childhood with cushioning love in order to withstand them and slide down the Milky Way. Faced by the clear conundrum, the Ypsilon that divides the roads, I find consolation in Herman Melville, in his written wager, a challenge that I dare transcribe today. Implacable I, the implacable sea, implacable most when most I smile, serene, pleased, not appeased, by myriad wrecks in me. It is not a coincidence that in my forked tongue, this Jonah's belly of a cave, not suitable for monosyllabic onomatopoeias, the bifurcated Spanish conjunction why, which tends to join all while it separates, coexists with that omnipotent, omnipresent I, yo. Yo? I wonder where I am, as I smile in an extreme first person who internally collapses and cries oceans of tears. Thank you. What a lovely version, Marta Batis. Congratulations. Thank you for being here. She is, of course, an award-winning author, translator, and educator, born and raised in Mexico City. She's been living in Canada since 2003. She's a friend of Literal magazine also, the author of several short story collections and a novela, and her work has appeared in numerous newspapers and magazines, Mexico, Spain, Dominican Republic, etc. She holds a PhD in Latin American literature and teaches Spanish and language and literature at both York and Toronto universities. Lovely version in English, Marta. And so now I think to conclude, we will listen to Pura read the original version in Spanish, and then we will say our goodbyes for now. Vamos a cerrar con broche de oro, as they say.
Gracias, Tania. Gracias. This poem is dedicated to Scott Griffin, who's a dear Canadian friend of mine and who actually underwent this journey through the seas. So it's sort of everything is based on his account. Eclipse. Dícese de la ocultación total o parcial de un astro que ocurre cuando se interpone otro entre él y el observador, o cuando pasa aquel por la sombra de un astro situado entre él y la estrella que lo ilumina, y están los tres completa o parcialmente alineados en un mismo plano. Esto afirma el Colmex, en competencia feroz con solo Dios sabe que otro conjunto erudito de togas y birretes. Lo peor del caso es que uno comprende la torpe explicación del diccionario y queda eclipsado entre enunciados relativos unidos como tira de embutidos. Ocultar, oscurecer una cosa a otra, significa denigrarla, reducirla, devaluarla. Vericuetos. 1. A bordo del lobo de mar va una tripulación compacta, hechiza y hechizada por el mero acaso de darle vuelta al globo y regresar vivo a casa, sintiéndose más audaz que Eneas o Magallanes. Antes de zarpar, durante y al final de la travesía, virgen antes, durante y después del parto. El capitán, un forastero extranjero, europeo recién llegado, si bien hoy vuelto americano, con facciones de mitológico grifón bajo el quepí. En vez de elevar plegarias a lo lejano, intangible, inventado, un poder reconocible entre asideros de alguna desmoronada tradición, alzó la voz a los cuatro vientos recitando casi a gritos el ese sí divino seguidor, que yo habría preferido titular secuaz, por tratarse de un término sin término, gutural, bellísimo adminículo de letras, electrocutando tímpanos. Pocos saben que es lo mismo, pues el paso del tiempo y el rodar lo han vestido y revestido del disfraz de cómplice, aunque también todo atributo resplandece, como los astros esa noche. ¿Quién seguía a quién? ¿Quién era secuaz de quién? Él, chiquito, yendo a ciegas tras su padre en la labranza, inmerso en la figura de un gigante omnipotente que encarnaba la vida por delante. O al revés, iba él, ya nada imberbe, abriendo surcos mientras el viejo se arrastraba con la vida por detrás, sin sombra, encorvado y empacado en los contornos del soberbio. Eran los dos, uno y el mismo Lazarillo, niño que circula por las venas y arterias del hombre, mirando maravillado la bóveda por dentro, los resplandores del ánima, devoto, seguidor del culto a las estrellas. Dos. Todos calafateando, todos cantando, no siempre felices, a ratos muy asustados ante diversas inminencias, presa de una incertidumbre colosal, creciente como esa tierra prometida, con la piel reseca, el agua salada carcomiendo el buen humor, esforzándose por los demás y fingiendo como nunca, vamos bien, viento en popa, etcétera. Hoy te toca a ti lavar la ropa, mañana a fulano cocinar, sopa, pescado, pescado, sopa. Pasado mañana a perengano fregar los pisos, lavabos y demás. Y sobre todo, la vigilancia nocturna se repetirá por turnos a buen ritmo. Nada de distracciones, melancolías, lamentos, nada, nada de eso. Y muy atentos a la reparación de las entrañas del bajel, que dista de la perfección, como nosotros. Cirugías menores y mayores, sin angustiar a nadie, marinos id est máquinas o viceversa. Baste con entrelazar cables al fin, los nervios de acero, imagen y semejanza de la relojería celeste. 3. No existe en esta lengua de Cervantes y Berceo onomatopeya clara que de golpe y porrazo haga erupción nombrando el estira y afloja, el infla y desinfla de las velas. Lástima. Algo semejante al thwack, oscilante verbo y sustantivo que se eleva, que se lleva al tú por tú con un lienzo ribeteado. Hablemos rasposa o dulcemente de las cosas, increpémoslas o agradezcámoslas mientras llegamos, para matar el tiempo. Mientras viento y aire nos acogen en su vientre, nos destrozan o conducen a puerto, ni buen ni mal, solo a puerto, punto. Ya hemos compartido un poco de todo, lo que importa y lo que no, lo que queremos, omitiendo con cuidado la menor mención del porvenir que aguarda a saber dónde y contiene lo que en realidad vemos. La de esta carabela, lo que en realidad vemos cuando decimos ver visiones. La de esta carabela, por ejemplo, que cruje y parte aguas, que se asume a flote. Incluso nos hemos adentrado en el terreno precario y pantanoso de las almas, las nuestras, en busca de respuestas, de amor, de perdón vicario. ¿Vicario? ¿Perdón? ¿Amor? ¿Respuestas? ¿En busca de? Y viene ya entre las olas el monstruo de mil cabezas, sublime onomatopeya en verbalización sicaria. 4. Después de la tempestad viene el crujir de dientes, el pánico de haber malinterpretado mapas, el hallazgo de la brújula quebrada, una ranura, herida mortal, calma que engaña, y de buenas a primeras, un espacio inesperado, no un compás de espera, sino el supremo, el firmamento cuajado de estrellas, en aparición coincidente con la fluorescencia en el lobo curvilíneo del cetáceo. Una ballena, produciendo chispas en 4 ojos sobre cubierta, 2 personas azoradas, alumbradas, alunadas, secuaces, en eclipse. Sí, el lobo de mar atracó en la Patagonia por última vez y de una pieza. Sus pasajeros, sus engendros, al salir del cuarto oscuro sin haber revelado nada digno de Copérnico, se cubrieron la mirada frente al insoportable fluvio del astro rey, que sí revelaba en cambio lo que Calderón de la Barca, otro Caronte, llamó el gran teatro del mundo. Y, frente a epifanías semejantes, uno solo puede confiar en haberse preparado desde niño con amor amortiguante para resistir su fuerza y deslizarse en la Vía Láctea frente a la clara interrogante. Y que divide los caminos. Me consuela Herman Melville, su apuesta por escrito. Un desafío que hoy me animo a traducir. Implacable yo, viejo mar implacable. Más implacable cuando más sonrío sereno, complacido, no en calma, por la mirada de naufragios que habitan mi interior. No es casual que en mi viperina boca, esta cueva, vientre de Jonás, no apta para onomatopeyas monosilébicas, sí convivan la bifurcada conjunción y, que quiere unir al separar, con la letra inicial de ese yo omnipotente, omnipresente. ¿Y yo? ¿Dónde he quedado yo al sonreír en primerísima persona, que tácita se expande y llora a mares? Gracias.
Bravo, bravo to everyone who shared their words with us this evening. I think I came in a little heavy-hearted with everything that's going on in the world today, and I feel uplifted by the words and the possibility of once again being together, this time virtually, but hopefully in the future we can share once again spaces and thoughts, ideas, imagination, creativity, all of the wonderful things that are involved in the shared language of poetry. Once again, this is a celebration of this book. What you heard this evening is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to be seen and heard in here, because poetry, always good to read it out loud, as we did this evening. I also wanted to mention the wonderful illustrations by artist Marta Perez Garcia that are featured throughout the book. And once again, I would like to thank everybody who made the symposium and the book possibility, not only the wonderful humans who are present here, but also, of course, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the University of Maryland, the Mexican Cultural Institute, Georgetown University. Am I forgetting? And Literal Publishing, of course. Once again, this is a wonderful celebration of our 20th anniversary as a publishing house and as a magazine. Who did I forget, Eyda?
The Library of Congress.
Something we didn't mention in the beginning, but all of the wonderful poets who participate here were recorded at the Library of Congress and now form part of their wonderful oral collection of poetry readings that are recorded at that magnificent library. So thank you again for joining us this evening. It's been my pleasure to moderate this session and to see all of you once again and to celebrate the shared language of poetry. Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for everything.
Thank you.